What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Yesterday, we had our first sales numbers that were posted for the PlayStation 5 Pro, this coming out of Japan, and it certainly surprised many people, and we'll go over exactly why that is here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Nintendo once again in the courtroom. This time, though, bit of an insight, some of their secrets being revealed for the Nintendo ninjas and how they actually tracked one person down. And we'll also be taking a look at Game of the Year nominations, as it's now been announced when they'll be revealed. And I figured, hey, you know what? I'll give my lineup of 6 titles that I think could actually be in it. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members of the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're gonna start today with Unreal and Unreal Tournament, as they're now just available for free. And in fact, Epic actually gave the go-ahead on this one. We can see this posted up, this is over on Polygon, where they say Unreal, the first-person shooter that introduced Unreal Engine to the world, and its multiplayer-focused follow-up, Unreal Tournament, have been preserved via the Internet Archive and are freely available for download with the blessing of developer Epic Games. They actually had this quote here from an Epic spokesperson saying, "We can confirm that Unreal and Unreal Tournament are available on archive.org, and people are free to independently link to and play these versions." Just outright, that's it. There's actually like custom installers that are now set up online. I'll leave a link down below to a thread that it's trustworthy with the links and stuff that they're sharing there. But the idea is the custom installer will actually pull the files from Internet Archive and then install any subsequent patches or configuration files so that it works in the current Windows climate, which is awesome. There are actually like custom servers apparently that are set up for this. I haven't tried it myself technically to like connect to one of these servers, but people are playing it online still, and it's just completely free at this time. So if you missed out on it, it's kind of a fun snapshot in time. But if you remember the good old days with Unreal Tournament, you can relive them completely free with Epic's blessing. Also, we did have some more games announced to be going into Apple Arcade, which I know I don't talk about it as much, but you know, sometimes the lineup's interesting, and I figured I'd bring in our people who do have Apple Arcade, which we can see this. This is over on CG Mag Online, who has them all listed here with the different dates from December 5th, December 9th, and January 9th. These all being dates these different games will be dropping into the service. And I guess some of the big ones here include Pac-Man 256 Plus, Hot Wheels Race Off Plus, and then moving up to December 9th, Final Fantasy IV 3D Remake Plus, and then Final Fantasy IV The After Years Plus, which anything I'm saying plus after, what happens when it goes into Apple Arcade is they remove any additional monetization, because these games may be free to play, for example, but they have like specific things that are set up for grinding. Oh, you want to buy extra experience or boosters. All of that's been removed and typically reworked so that it at least works well enough in something like Apple Arcade without those transactions. And then moving to January 9th, Skate City, New York, we have Gears and Goo, Three Kingdoms Heroes, Final Fantasy Plus, Trials of Mana Plus, which is really cool. Like I said, it's just cool because these are games going in Apple Arcade. If you have it, great. I still don't think I would say, oh, absolutely go sign up for it because of these games, but they actually have a pretty serious library of titles right now, and it's not an expensive service technically, and honestly, if you buy an Apple device, you may actually get a code to try it out for a couple of months. So in that instance, yeah, there you go. Some Final Fantasy titles going in here in the next month or so. Definitely check them out. Oh, and it looks like Team Asobi isn't done just yet with Astro, as they've been going through each week and releasing a new speedrun level and a new bot to collect. It appears there are others heading in that maybe are just unannounced at this time. Currently, there's actually, I think, 4 or 5 other references to different intellectual properties in the credits, which we assume means those bots will be going in. And it looks like another one's been added. I'm not going to show it to you here. I will link to it if you just want to go take a look at who would be going into the game, but it is really fun to still think that Team Asobi would have other surprises in the future for us here coming up, this just being the latest example. And I will say this crossover, it was pretty cool to see, but it definitely wasn't one I was necessarily expecting. So here's hoping there are some other fun surprises set up for Astrobot to close out the year, but maybe even start 2025. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the PlayStation 5 Pro and some of the initial sales data that's come in. This would be in Japan, where we have the Famitsu sales charts that at least gives us an idea as to how things are doing week to week. And in this case, we can see how the PlayStation 5 Pro did with its initial shipment and first few days there there on the market. First though, let's talk about the software, which we can see the top 10. That's starting with Mario & Luigi Brothership, that coming in at $63,441, which not necessarily in the level of the DS Mario & Luigi style games. Those were at times in like the six figures for its opening week. This puts it more in line with some of the other ones like the Game Boy Advance, for example, and others. So not bad, not great. I think somewhere in the middle. Then we have Super Mario Party Jamboree. That's another 43,347 stacked on top. That's actually about 400,000 copies sold already just in Japan. Romancing Saga 2, then Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, of course, Battle Spirits Crossover, Minecraft, Animal Crossing New Horizons, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, Slitterhead, which unfortunately didn't even cross 5,000 copies there in Japan in its first week, and then Nintendo Switch Sports rounding out the top 10. Moving over to the hardware, the PlayStation 5 is indeed at the top, 88,160 units. Not something we typically see. Usually it's Nintendo with their Switch system at the top here for hardware. That is right below it though at 64,012 units. The Xbox Series 2,405 units, and then the PlayStation 4 somehow still selling 49 of them. Now, the thing that gets interesting is when we look at the PlayStation 5 split, as they will track different SKUs, the PS5 Pro, 78,086 units. This surprised a lot of people. So first of all, the PlayStation 5 Pro was already looked at as expensive at $700. With the exchange rate and the pricing in Japan, it's actually right around $750 or so dollars. So, I mean, it's already a $50 premium over the $700 that we talk about here. But on top of that, it is just a digital system, so it wouldn't necessarily affect any of the software charts, since if you go into the store and buy it, I mean, you're probably not buying a disc copy of a game to go with it, unless you maybe find the disc drive there, and as we've seen so far online, it's actually kind of rare to find these at retail price, at least at this time. So I would assume a lot of these PlayStation 5 Pro systems are more or less being bought to replace a current PS5, or maybe just being bought at this time as a gift, maybe later on in the holiday season. Or some have wondered, could this be a situation where people are buying a PlayStation 5 Pro to then resell it somewhere else, as people mentioned they're taking them to China to sell there. I mean, any of that's possible, but the bottom line is I think Sony in this case sold more than many of us were expecting. Whether they're going to scalpers or people replacing their system, doesn't matter. They're still selling the PlayStation 5 Pro, and in fact, this actually is roughly 13,000 or so more units than the PlayStation 4 Pro when it debuted back in 2016 in Japan. And Sony recently said they believed, at least Hiroki Totoki, to investors, that he's under the impression this is actually selling better than the PS4 Pro when it debuted, and the numbers so far are reflecting that. So interesting, because it's just there's so much discourse right now around the PS5 Pro online, but it seems like when the chips are down and the thing comes out, people are buying it. I mean, we'll find out a bit more in the Circana report. I believe we'll hear about the November one, probably like midway through December. And while the PS5 Pro will be tracked by revenue, and it's just a more expensive system, so it might actually end up being the best-selling system just in general for November, it'll still be another interesting stat point to have for this mid-gen refresh console. This is only the second time Sony's done it, obviously, after the PS4 Pro, and so far, it seems like the market's speaking, at least based on these early numbers. They might have been right with it. We'll see, though, again, with the Circana report next month and how that one shakes out. Next up, let's talk about the Nintendo Ninjas, who have been discussed as like this mythical being, basically. It's like, hey, if you start downloading Switch games, they'll show up at your house in like the middle of the night, and they'll slap a cease and desist and move along. Well, in this case, we had a bit of the shroud of mystery pulled back, and because Nintendo likes to spend so much time in the courtroom, sometimes they do end up in a situation where they have to explain the steps they took to just track someone down, and that actually did happen. Now, this was covered by GameFile. Steven Totillo is actually doing a very good job over there with some of these, I'd say, more interesting stories and really going by some of the details, but we'll take a look here, and I'll have the full story linked down below if you'd like to read a little more into this, because there are some very fine point details that are really shown here. But we'll start from the top, saying that in June, the Mario Maker sued James Archbox Williams for allegedly violating its digital copyrights by selling pirated copies of Switch games. In 2023, Nintendo hired the law firm Mitchell, Silberg, and Berg and Nup to investigate free shops, so like the shops that I guess sell or allow downloads for pirated Switch games. In 2015, a Reddit user called Archbox, who had posted to a Switch Pirates community using a turtle avatar, had posted to the Reddit Phoenix subreddit. So apparently they had posted there just talking about like eye doctors in Phoenix, and I believe in like the university near there. In a related filing, a Nintendo employee who works in Nintendo's product lifecycle management group said that in February 2024, Nintendo had tentatively ID'd Archbox as James Williams. A Nintendo worker subsequently punched that info into Nintendo's system for tracking repairs and found 2 repair orders from James Williams, complete with a Surprise, Arizona shipping address. Yes, again, I've discussed this many times with Nintendo and how they operate. Guys, they will figure out ways to find your online footprint and then track it as far back here as 2015 on Reddit, talking about optometrists and stuff on Reddit, which is, it's wild stuff. They'll end up at different Discord rooms. You won't even know they're there, seeing some of the conversations happening. They get pretty in the weeds with this stuff. Now, according to Rundown Events, Nintendo apparently sent Williams one of his repaired items, which they don't say if it was a Switch or what it was, 2 days before sending him the cease and desist, which I can only assume means that they watched the tracking, saw that, we'll say it was a Switch, was returned back for repair, and that it was accepted. Like, delivery was complete. Okay, great. We know they're there. We're going to send the cease and desist, which they did sign for, said they would comply with Nintendo. But the reason we know about all this stuff is because they just kind of ghosted them, disappeared, and like that was it. So Nintendo, pushing for default judgment, had to explain all the steps they went through to show that they did everything possible to try to reach out to this person, communicate to them, and basically get them to the courtroom, or to be able to complete this lawsuit with a plea or whatever there. So an interesting look behind the curtain here with Nintendo, and it just shows how serious they are, yes, about piracy, but yes, also about tracking someone down. If they want to find you, they'll figure out a way to do it. Next up, let's talk about the Game Awards, which we're actually just outside of a month away from it this time. And I talked about yesterday, look, I think they're going to do an announcement that they will go over all the different categories and all the nominees next week, and that's indeed what's happening. We can see this, though, posted up. This is over on Jeff's official account, where he says, here we go. Monday, the nominees for the 10th anniversary of the Game Awards will be revealed. Join me for our global nomination announcement live stream at noon Eastern, exactly 1 month until the show. So I'm looking at this like, okay, I know people usually tune in for the announcements. World premiere, something really exciting because it's like, oh, it's E3. Remember E3? E3 in December. But we still do have the Game of the Year nominations and winner, and that's usually the big thing. I think the other categories most people forget about, kind of forget about Game of the Year at times, but like what won Game of the Year here 3 years ago? You'd probably have to look it up. But in this case, it is an interesting year because I looked around, I was trying to put together my list of 6 that I think would be nominated here. It's not necessarily what I would absolutely nominate. Like, let's say I saw people mention, I really like Unicorn Overlord. Do I think Unicorn Overlord is going to be nominated here at the Game Awards? Probably not. This is the way it is. I wouldn't be shocked if it was on some people's Game of the Year list, but in this case, we kind of get the vibe as to what they're looking for here. So I put together 6 titles that I think have a good chance of being nominated here. Now, the top 3 are pretty obvious, and I think we'll all agree on them. Metaphor, Astrobot, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, the other 3 were a bit more difficult to kind of pick and choose from because after we get past those 3, some of the high-profile games are mostly in like the 80s, right? So you could throw a handful of them together and pick out 3, and you might have a better chance even at this than I do. But I decided to start with Silent Hill 2. Yeah, it's going to be interesting because that's Konami. I don't know how Jeff is going to feel about that one. There was still the back and forth with Konami and Kojima and how Jeff was annoyed that they kept Kojima apparently from going to an accepted award. It was a whole thing, right? So we'll see how that one turns out. The fifth title I have is Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, which is a higher rated title technically out of the upper echelon of the 80s, but I do think it's kind of like that pinnacle for RGG with the Like a Dragon franchise. I just think it's a very good game, and I don't think it'll look out of place there with these other titles. And then the sixth game I have is Black Myth Wukong. It was one of my favorite games of the year. I think it is a good title, and the only drawback to me that it has really is that the PlayStation 5 experience is not good, and it's still not good, even with the Pro. It's very, very poor frame rate, visuals, the whole thing. Play it on PC though, and it's just a very solid, very interesting, I'll even say, action RPG adventure style experience that like comes just up against the Souls-like experience, but not quite diving all the way in to it. But those would be my six. Of course, let me know what you think the 6 titles will be announced there as Game of the Year nominees next week. And obviously we'll be covering it there, and especially with the fallout that I'm sure will ensue after the announcement. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Avowed, as we did have technically a new release date announced for it outside of the one that was already revealed. And then we had Phil Spencer doubling down once again as to why it's now a 2025 release instead of a 2024 game. We can see this though over on their official account, where they say Avowed launches on February 18th, 2025. You can pre-order today on the Xbox Series, Xbox app, Battle.net even, and Steam, or play it on day one with Game Pass, buy the premium edition, and get up to 5 days early access. So it's a game that would release on February 13th, which is still kind of annoying. I know Microsoft has been doing this, and it works. We saw it with Starfield work really well for them. But that means that, let's face it, it would be ready on February 3rd. I mean, it's a single player game, guys. Like, they're not like, oh wow, these multiplayer servers are gonna get absolutely crushed if we don't do this. No, they're using the FOMO to their advantage and selling it on February 13th, technically, for more money. Now, the thing with this, though, with Avowed, is it's coming out in February 2025, and there are already many games starting to pile up in that month. So we have Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Civ 7, Assassin's Creed Shadows. Those are all on the front side of Avowed. And then on the back half, we have Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, and then we have Monster Hunter Wilds. So I feel like Avowed, it should stand out somewhat, but it wouldn't shock me if it gets kind of lost in the shuffle here just a bit. Now, Phil Spencer did talk with GameFile about their decision to move it into 2025, saying we can afford it when we have the Diablo expansion, then Black Ops, then Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. We didn't move it because Obsidian needed the time. They'll use the time. Xbox Game Studios head Matt Booty and I, we planned it out. We talked with the Game Pass team. We said, okay, let's make sure we pace this out a little better. And he's not even mentioning Stalker 2, which is out, next week. So there were a lot of games that were just going to hit at one after the other. And I mean, if they tried to fit Avowed in there with these other games, it might be that situation we saw with Square Enix where they just try to release a ton of stuff one year and it ended up hurting sales. The only issue with that is Avowed is on Game Pass, and that was their focus for quite a while until seemingly recently, where they've made that multi-platform push. And now they're interested in sales again, so I guess them pushing it into February at least has it away from their first-party games, but as I've mentioned, it's starting to pile up in that month with all these other games. If anything else, hopefully this means that Avowed will come out as a more polished product as opposed to it launching, we'll say, this month, but if it doesn't, that'll be a whole other thing. So we'll see how things go for Obsidian when it comes out in February, but at least for now, you can technically buy in 5 days earlier on February 13th, which is basically the new release date. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, what do you think of Microsoft's This Is an Xbox marketing campaign? 51% say I think it's bad, 31% say I think it's confusing, and then 18% think it's good. I probably could have had another option here saying, what's that? Because I looked in the comments, and a lot of people were like, I don't know, what campaign? I've never heard of it. What is it? And they had just announced it yesterday. I actually did a video, so if you're trying to figure out what is this and how could this impact Microsoft, maybe even for next generation, check that video out. But definitely differing opinions on this one, if it's good or not. I do see a lot of people like just confused by it, and yeah, I think it's more or less I'm confused by what Microsoft is doing, because it seems like they're half in, half out on having an Xbox console and then just telling you not to buy one. So it's interesting times right now for Microsoft. I think they're just in this in-between period between the current generation and next generation. Although we said that kind of with the Xbox One and the Xbox Series as well. So here's hoping they have like this massive paradigm shift for next generation. So this starts to make a bit more sense. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Brent, who says, imagine if Sony swallowed their pride and licensed RPCS3. Well, RPCS3 has made incredible strides. I mean, the fact that you can play Metal Gear Solid 4 on your PC, 4K, higher frame rate, is impressive stuff to see. But I don't think Sony wants to license out someone else's emulator to then make work on the PlayStation. If anything, they'd rather just poach people off of a team like that and then have them build their own in-house emulator with their own engineers who are extremely knowledgeable of their hardware from previous generations, including the PS3. Sony will eventually, I think, have to figure this out, because the server blades and the custom processors and the cell chips that they have right now powering Resistance, for example, that would be streaming to your platform, your system, those aren't going to be around forever. And unless they just want to start taking away PS3 games outright and never bringing them back, they got to work something out. And I feel like an emulator will eventually happen for the PS3. I don't know if it'll happen this generation, and maybe next gen, and they kind of work things around even that as an idea from the ground up when they make the PS6. But one thing's for sure, I don't think it was ever going to work natively on the PS4, and we still see it being supported, that console. So maybe they have to move past that before the PS3 emulator gets like completely revealed and released, and that might still be years off, since the PS4 seemingly going to live on to at least 2026 if third parties have anything to say about it. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card, or maybe did want to learn a bit more about Microsoft's This Is Xbox campaign and what I think their big shift could be, their big aha moment could be for next generation that they've actually been kind of alluding to here for a bit. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.